With the Napoleon movie released around the world, I would like to take the opportunity to talk about the Napoleonic era from a perspective that is not usually mentioned, which is in the Americas. Much like the 7 Years' War and the War of Spanish Succession, the Napoleonic Wars has direct effects outside of the European continent. To begin to understand why Napoleon affected the Americas without even ever stepping foot there, we have to go back to the beginning. At the end of the 7 Years' War, France had lost most of its American empire, save for a few islands in the Caribbean. This affected the French economy since they were not pulling in as much money as before, and the expenses given during the 7 Years' War caused massive debts on said economy. In 1777, the French monarchy was convinced that supporting the British colonial rebels in North America was a suitable reason to strike back at Britain in an attempt to save their economy from collapse. After spending over 2 billion livres in financial aid by 1781 and tens of thousands of soldiers, the French economy was in a worse state than ever. King Louis XVI summoned the Estates General in an attempt to find a solution, but the unbalanced political system in France basically pushed the non-nobility and the non-clergy classes of France into a state where the monarch could no longer be trusted to defend their interests. On July 14, 1789, the French Revolution had begun. After 10 years of political unrest and war, which included the execution of the monarchy, the terror, the First Coalition, the Italian campaign, and the Egyptian campaign, the French Revolution came to a close in 1799 when General Napoleon Bonaparte became first consul of France through his coup of 18 Brumaire and the creation of a new constitution. With this, we come to our first effect of the Napoleonic Age in the Americas. The Haitian Revolution was a conflict within the context of the French Revolution. In August of 1789, the revolutionaries wrote the Declarations of Rights of the Man and the Citizen, a document inspired by the Declaration of Independence of the United States, which was not a coincidence because Thomas Jefferson was in France at the time of the Revolution and helped write the document. The document declared in one of the articles liberty and equality for all. This was a problem because France held a large slave population. About 500,000 slaves forcefully lived in the French colony of Saint-Domingue and worked in their extensive sugar plantations. These plantations contributed a large portion of revenue to the French economy, one that was already in poor condition. In 1791, the slaves, learning that no liberties or equal rights shall be bestowed upon them, rose in rebellion against the planter class. This conflict would last 13 years. Between 1801 and 1802, in one final attempt to secure Saint-Domingue under French control, Napoleon, consul of France, sent his brother-in-law General Charles Leclerc with an army of 40,000 men to secure Saint-Domingue and proclaim that the island's residents were in fact free. Leclerc had slave leader Toussaint Louverture arrested and taken to France, where he would die in prison in 1803. After hearing that the French island of Guadeloupe had reinstated slavery and the Haitian population rose again, and this time secured their independence by the year 1804. With Haiti now independent, this changed Napoleon's plans for a new French-American empire forever. When the 7 Years' War ended in 1763, France had secretly negotiated with Spain in the Treaty of Fontainebleau, where Spain would keep the French territory of Louisiana. In 1800, France and Spain signed the Third Treaty of San Ildefonso, where Spain would restore Louisiana back to France in exchange for Italian territory. Napoleon's plans for Louisiana were to create a buffer state for American expansion and an area for future French development to fund his European wars. Due to the Haitian Revolution, Napoleon offered the entire territory to the United States for $15 million, which they purchased in 1803. This allowed the United States to double their territory in one single purchase, and the money earned would be used to fund other projects back in France. In the years since selling Louisiana and the loss of Haiti, not much was happening in the Americas until the year 1808, which is when the Iberian Wars of Independence began. To understand the subject, we must first understand Napoleon's economic and military actions in Europe. Since becoming Emperor of the French in 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte had been fighting a series of coalition wars against the other powers of Europe except for one, Spain. Spain had been an ally of France since the Second Treaty of San Ildefonso in 1795, which forced Spain to go to war against Britain. This affected Spain immensely because now the British were attacking Spanish shipping and ports in both Europe and the Americas. For example, in 1797, the British destroyed a Spanish fleet off the Cape of St. Vincent and captured the island of Trinidad. But the British also failed to take the islands of Puerto Rico and the Canary Islands. Things came to a climactic point in the alliance when the Franco-Spanish fleet under Admiral Villeneuve came under attack by Lord Nelson's British fleet at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805, which resulted in a massive victory for the British and allowed them to dominate the seas for the next century. Not just that, it would be the first ripple effect in the tsunami that would be Spain's eventual imperial downfall that they did not even ask for. An economic policy that Napoleon enforced in Europe by 1807 was the continental system. That was to be a blockade against British trade on the continent, but it was very difficult to enforce, and smuggling was common. One of the countries that continued this trade was Portugal, a historical British ally. A French and Spanish coalition army was formed to enforce the policy on Portugal. This may have been Spain's greatest mistake. Despite managing to take control of Portugal and force the royal family to exile in Brazil, the French had other plans, and they began taking position in major Spanish cities, and by 1808, it was too much for the Spanish people. Spanish King Carlos IV abdicated in favor of his son Fernando VII, or Fernando VII, and he was forced to abdicate as well thanks to Napoleon himself. The Spanish royal family were made French prisoners in Bayonne, and Napoleon placed his brother Joseph Bonaparte as King of Spain. On the 2nd of May, 1808, the Spanish peoples rose up in revolt against the French occupiers, thus beginning the Peninsular War, or as it's known in Spain as the War of Spanish Independence. I will not be going into details on the war, for this is not the purpose of the video. I recommend Epic History TV series on the Napoleonic Wars, which include lots of details of the Peninsular War itself. One of the main causes of the Iberian American Wars of Independence had its roots in the War of Spanish Succession. With the installation of the Bourbon dynasty in Spain, during the 18th century, they implemented a series of changes known as the Bourbon reforms. This included changing the colonial administrations from local elites to peninsular elites, increased taxation, budget balancing, eliminating the Indies convoy system, military restructuring, among other things. The reforms overall were very positive to many places, especially those that were underdeveloped due to loosened control by the Habsburgs. But it was very unpopular to local elites known as criollos, for they had lived comfortably without the need of direct supervision from the monarchy. When Napoleon invaded Spain in 1808, the criollos saw this as a unique opportunity for one of two things to happen. One, get their original rights back, or two, independence, being inspired by the United States and the overall Enlightenment period. Many people in the viceroyalties of Spanish America were concerned about French dominance over their lands and began to organize to prevent this from happening and to proclaim Fernando VII as the true monarch of Spain. The first to do this was Miguel Hidalgo, a friar from Mexico, and his famous speech known as the Grito de Dolores called for the elimination of the Supreme Central Junta, which was the provincial government of Spain at the time, and called for the restoration of Fernando VII on the 16th of September of 1810. Soon, other provinces in Spanish America started creating their own independence movements all across the continent. Between 1810 and 1825, colonial insurgents, loyalist armies, and peninsular forces fought all over Central and South America to either restore order or break away to create new ones. These movements will be led by the criollos in search of their long-lost power, with figures such as Simón Bolívar, José de San Martín, Bernardo O'Higgins, Agustín de Iturbide, Francisco de Miranda, among many others. By the end of it all, Spain would lose almost all their overseas territories, with the exception of Equatorial Guinea, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. The reason why these places did not rise up in rebellion was because they were highly militarized areas, had large royalist populations, and were isolated from other rebelling territories, making assistance difficult. Spain would hold on to these territories for another 73 years until 1898, where they would lose the latter 4 in the Spanish-American War. You can watch my series on the Puerto Rican campaign of the Spanish-American War in my channel. Another long-lasting legacy of the Napoleonic invasion of Spain was the Constitution of 1812. When the Bonapartes took over in 1808, they established a new constitution, but it was not very popular among Spanish subjects because they were a foreign influence on the country and had also separated themselves from the Catholic Church. In response, several juntas were created across Spain and proclaimed themselves as the successor government, but in that same year, a Supreme Central Junta was established to assume control in the city of Cádiz. In 1809, they sent letters all over to the Spanish territories around the world to send representatives to Cádiz as part of their new governmental policy. It was the first time any European country had done such a move with their empire. Their first session was held in 1810. In 1812, while the war in Spain was finally turning in favor of the Allies, the Cortes in Cádiz created the Constitution of 1812, which proclaimed a liberalized government, a constitutional monarchy, freedom of the press, freedom of industry, the right to own property, and citizenship to all people in the empire. It was a radical move for the time, and even though King Fernando VII abolished the Constitution in 1817, it would have a lasting effect on Spanish politics to this day, for it was the inspiration for future Spanish constitutions. There is one place that we haven't discussed yet that also had its effects due to Napoleon's intervention, and that is Brazil. As stated earlier, in 1807, the Portuguese monarchy was forced to abandon Portugal itself and move to their overseas colony of Brazil. This was the first and only time in history that a European monarch visits their colony and establishes a government with themselves as the de facto rulers. Established in Rio de Janeiro, the Portuguese royals had began modernizing the colony and would allow it to become a South American powerhouse in the future. With Napoleon expelled from the Iberian Peninsula in 1814, the royal family had decided to stay in Brazil. In 1815, then Prince João VI established the United Kingdom of Portugal, Brazil, and Algarves, with Rio de Janeiro as its capital, making it the first time the capital of a European nation resides outside of the continent. This union lasted until 1822, with the independence of Brazil, which occurred due to that in 1821, rebellions and plots in Portugal demanded that João returned to Lisbon, and he left his son, Pedro, in charge of Brazil. With many Brazilian noblemen content with the privileges that they have earned in these past years, Brazil gained its independence pacifically, establishing the Empire of Brazil, which lasted until 1889. If you would like to learn more about colonial history of the Americas and the Caribbean, please like and subscribe to this channel. Many thanks.